Hi, sister.
Hello.
All right. Well, here's our first podcast. It's a long time coming.
Welcome to the show. This is Twisted and Mysterious, a podcast. That's what it's called.
Sure is.
About true crime and mystery things.
All of the mystery things.
The most mysterious things
that we can find. Okay. So, well, our first story, we kind of didn't want to go with like all of the big regular ones that everybody hears all the time, like the Bundys and the Dahmers, but we wanted to do something that was, I don't know, kind of hit close to home, I guess.
And I mean, I think that every town probably has some sort of crime that people know about. And I don't know how much other people from our hometown know about this crime, but it was definitely one that affected our childhood.
Absolutely. And so where this story started for us is with the kidnapping and murder of Dena Lynn Gore in 1986. And I had just turned 4 that summer.
I was a teeny tiny baby.
Farron was a teeny tiny baby. And, you know, this was something that colored our entire childhoods. I mean, anytime we wanted to go anywhere, it was always, well, remember that Dena went missing, going to Allsup's.
Yeah. It was, you know, don't wander off too far on your own or you're going to end up like this.
And so, July 1986, like I said, Dena went missing. She was 9 years old. She was riding her bike to Allsup's, which is a local convenience store in this area. And 5 days later, after a massive multi-jurisdictional search, she was found dead in a shallow grave on a ranch about 70 miles outside of Artesia. We're in New Mexico, sorry. I mean, and like I said, and we said, this completely changed how parents behaved with their children in this area.
Definitely at our house. I don't know how much everybody else did, but it shaped the way that our mother let us go places.
Yeah, well, and I had even read an article from the Artesia newspaper at the time that this all was going on, where, you know, people were meeting at the Tasty Freeze or, you know, the Little League fields or whatever, and, like, they were talking about this is our safe town, and now, like, kids aren't getting an automatic yes whenever they wanted to go somewhere.
Right, and this was the 80s, so it was still pretty lax as far as, like, letting your kids go and do things by themselves.
Right. So, like I said, the story started for us talking about the story of Dena Lynn Gore. But what I found as I started, like, looking into this more, because, you know, as kids, we just heard, you know, Dena went kidnapped and she was murdered, and there actually was so much more that went into the story that I didn't even realize was part of this. So this kind of actually turned into the story of her murderer, who's Terry Clark. So let's talk about him for a minute. He was born May 17th, 1956 in Roswell, New Mexico. He was one of 5 kids that was born to Calvin Clark and Vera Lobley. His dad worked for the city of Roswell as an engineer and the superintendent of streets. From everything that I read, it was just like a normal childhood. Like they weren't like rich or anything, but like they lived in a nice house. They didn't
Right. And you hear that a lot, that, you know, they don't necessarily come from terrible upbringings. It's just something that happens.
Right. Like, I didn't hear it, like, anything that was talked about, like his dad was a really nice guy. I didn't see anything about his mom or anything, but so he went to Goddard High School. He dropped out his junior year. I had seen in one source that he had possibly been suspended for truancy, and then he just didn't go back.
Decided to stay truant.
But former teachers and classmates that were interviewed after his arrest, you know, they just described him as, like, quiet. He wasn't in any trouble. He was a tall, skinny, like, nerd. He wasn't really memorable. After he dropped out, he earned his GED and went to work for a bus building company that was out at the base in Roswell. And then at the age of 20, he joined the Navy. So this was April 1976, and he served his 4 years, and then he was honorably discharged. When he came back to Roswell, he met a woman named Dena, and they got married. In June 1980, he began working for the city of Roswell as an apprentice carpenter, and he worked there until his arrest in 1984. He lived in a, quote, respectable neighborhood west of downtown. He was earning about $1,200 a month, which an inflation calculator told me that was about $4,500 now. They had 2 children, a girl in 1981 and a boy in 1983. And at the time of his first arrest, they were toddlers. And he didn't have any prior law trouble that was reported. I think there was one thing like over some marijuana seeds or something. It wasn't a big deal. So in 1984, though, something happened. Like, I don't. So this is kind of like where his crimes started, per se. October 7th, a woman named Cynthia Fernandez reported that at about 6 p.m., a man in a white car parked in front of her house and stared at her daughter through the window. And that she said that she stared him down until he drove away like 20 to 30 minutes later. Like he just stared in her house for 20 minutes. And
get a hobby, guy.
Right. And like later, after all of the stuff about Terry came out in the newspaper, she and her husband realized that it was Terry Clark who worked. His job was next to her husband's job. And so they had met, talked, and had conversations and stuff. So I guess he knew about their family. The next day, October 8th, Donita Welch, who was 6 years old, so she's a teeny tiny little thing, was walking home from school to her grandmother's house. It was about 2:45 p.m., and I guess she and her brother would cut through an alley. And a man in a blue and white car drove up behind her and grabbed her. Her older brother was walking the same route, but he was like 2 blocks behind her. And so he didn't see it happen, but when he got up to where she was snatched, he found her jacket. And Donita, as an adult, has said that she has blocked a lot of the memories, which is totally understandable.
Right. This kidnapping, or whatever you want to call it, didn't end in a way that Dena Lynn Gore's did.
No, it didn't. So, yeah, Donita, thankfully, made it through this. But she said that she remembers being pushed out of the car in a field west of town, bloody, half naked, and terrified. And she's 6, like teeny tiny little thing. So it was just 30 minutes later, she was found walking in the 600 block of South Lee, where a couple called the police. And it was determined that during the attack, she was sexually molested. She was taken to St. Mary's Hospital, where she told the police that her attacker was a white man about the age of her father, who drove, quote, a little white and blue car with baby stuff inside. And I guess they asked her what she meant by baby stuff, and she said the things that babies sit in. And so there were 2 car seats in the back, which is understandable because he has 2 babies. Another thing I wrote down, apparently she had told them that he was wearing a blue and white striped shirt and blue pants. And I was like, is matching his car.
Yeah.
Just a look, I guess.
He had a certain taste.
I guess. Well, and later he drives another white and blue car, so I guess that's just his colors. So 2 days after the attack, an article ran in the Roswell Daily Record with a physical description of the man in the car. One witness recalled a white car with blue stripes zooming past at 3:15 p.m. Another witness said that the car was a white Camaro Z28. Calls and tips were coming in like the day of the incident, even before the article ran in the newspaper. But Roswell, even still as big as it is still pretty close-knit community, so everybody knows everybody.
It's still got a very small-town mentality.
Right. So those were already coming in. And so apparently Terry Clark was already like on the radar even before any of this happened, because he also happened to own a white Camaro with blue stripes and a blue interior that had 2 baby seats in the back. And he also happened to have called out of work sick that day. And so the sheriff showed up at his house that day and said he was investigating the rape of a 6-year-old girl found wandering on the edge of town naked with a lacerated vagina, and that Clark's car matched the description. And I was like reading that and I was thinking, it's a lot of information to tell to somebody that you're just questioning about a crime.
Right.
But that's what it was. So
that's a lot of information for a person of interest.
Exactly. So during the investigation, like I said, it was found out that he had called out of sick work that day. And he was home after 4 p.m. because I guess his boss stopped by to talk to him. And when the police questioned him that first day, they looked at his car, and the passenger seat and floorboard were wet, and the floor mat was hanging on the fence, and the whole rest of his car was dry. And so I guess they thought that was a little weird. But he wasn't arrested for 9 more days. Also, I guess when this came out, an 18-year-old girl came forward and said that on September 29th, so even before he was like peeping in that one lady's window, a man in a blue and white car tried to force her into his car at gunpoint on a dark street corner in Roswell, but she was able to escape unharmed, she said, due to traffic in the area. And so she, I guess, had recognized the description that Donita had given to the newspaper, and so she came forward and was like, hey, this guy tried to take me too. So Wednesday, October 10th, and then the following Monday, Donita was taken to a hypnotist to try and help her remember what happened. The weird thing about this hypnotist is he wasn't a hypnotist. So it says that he was a PI, a private investigator.
So just a guy they gave a stopwatch to, and
guy, yeah. So he, I don't know how would you say polygrapher or polygrapher?
I have no idea.
I don't know. I keep saying it polygrapher in my head because it seems to make more sense.
It reminds me of polygamist.
It does. But so he's not a psychologist. He's not a psychiatrist.
Just a guy with a stopwatch.
A guy with a stopwatch. So they have him.
Or a pocket watch, rather.
Yeah, there it is. You're getting very sleepy. So, surprise, they're unable to figure anything out. And I don't know why they use this guy.
The hypnotism was just not hypnotizing.
It was not. So an article in the Albuquerque Journal said that Donita, quote, was frightened, agitated, and uncooperative, and she cried and said she wanted to go home.
She's 6. And had some really terrible things happen to her.
And I mean, and also like this comes back to haunt them in the appeals that they used some random guy with a pocket watch. They almost said stopwatch. So that Wednesday, she was shown a photo array of 9 men, and she picked Terry Clark out, and he was arrested at 10 p.m. that night. He was charged with criminal sexual penetration, kidnapping, and attempted kidnapping in the case of the 18-year-old woman. The other weird thing I thought about this is, like, in everything that I read, I mean, it's neither here nor there, I guess, but that woman was never named. Like, and she's 18. So it wasn't like she was a minor. I don't know why. Like, because you would think it would be in, like, police records or something. And especially if they were going to go to trial over it. But
yeah, I don't know if she asked to have her name left out of the media or what, but
possibly. So October 18th, Terry Clark was arraigned before the magistrate judge, John McLemore, and held on a $150,000 bond. His preliminary hearing was scheduled for November 20th in the district court before Judge Paul Sneed, who becomes probably a big player in all of this. On November 14th, Judge Sneed reduced Clark's bond to only $50,000, and he was released after serving only 27 days with the following conditions. Please pay careful attention to these conditions because they come up a lot. So he had to post a $50,000 appearance bond, have no contact with the victim or members of the victim's families, maintain contact with his public defender, not leave the state without written permission from the court, and not be physically present inside Roswell city limits except for court appearances, conferences with attorney, and such appearances as are necessary to his defense. So basically, pay this bond, stay away from the little girl and her family.
And leave Roswell.
Yeah.
Go be somebody else's problem.
Right. It's just, I don't know if that's like a common thing. Like I
don't know. I've never been a criminal.
I've never been a criminal either. Okay, so he left Roswell. He went to stay with his older brother, Steve, on the Squaw Valley Ranch, which is southwest of Roswell, where his brother worked for a cattle company. If you're from the area or know the area, this is 62 miles northwest of Artesia, north of Hope. So Artesia is south of Roswell. This ranch is kind of in between and to the west, so kind of triangulate that way. So Donita's trial, the trial for her attack started on May 31st, 1985. It lasted only 5 days. On June 4th, Clark was found guilty of first-degree criminal sexual penetration and first-degree kidnapping. The trial for the 18-year-old that he had attempted to kidnap, it fell apart. Like the whole case fell apart because Judge Sneed said that they couldn't bring any information from Denita Welch's trial up in her trial, and there really wasn't any evidence without that. And so that kind of went away, but he was found guilty for attacking Jonita. He was released on his $50,000 bond with the same conditions: pay the bond,
stay away from this family, and get out of Roswell.
Yeah. During the so he was released pending sentencing, and then during the sentencing hearing, his father, his brother Steve, his wife, and a longtime friend testified on his behalf. There were several letters of recommendation sent on his behalf. On June 27th, he was sentenced to 24 years with credit for the 27 days served. Judge Sneed, he allowed Clark to be released on his bond again, pending his appeal. And so to Judge Sneed's credit, giving him some credit here, the law in New Mexico at the time was that criminals were bonded basically automatically unless they were being charged with first-degree murder.
Right.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. There are some other pretty terrible crimes that people shouldn't be, released on the public with.
So she's attacked in October. He served 27 days. Now we're in June of the following year, and he's only served 27 days out of all of this, and he's sentenced to 24 years. But instead of going to prison, he's released again because of his appealing the case.
Right.
And part of the appeal was Mr. Hypnotist, and like some other
Officer Pocket Watch.
Yeah, Officer Pocket Watch. So let's see. Judge allowed Clark out on his bond again, pending appeal, despite the DA requesting that his bond be denied because his release would be traumatic for his victim. Additionally, the DA pointed out that Clark had already violated the conditions of his bond because he had been seen within Roswell city limits on personal business at least twice. The DA said that he brought this up, but it fell on deaf ears. And a lot of the things that I read was that he was given a lot of leeway because people liked his dad so much. Because his dad was like an upstanding member of the community. And
you can be an upstanding member of the community all day long. That doesn't make your son any less of a scumbag. Right.
And so I guess that was like a big thing that people assumed was happening here, was that he was given a lot of leeway because of that. So on June 12th, 1986, the appellate court ruled against Terry Clark and upheld the judgment of the district court. But guess what? He was released again so that the Supreme Court could hear his appeal.
Right.
So it doesn't matter that all of these courts are like, this dude is super guilty.
This guy is a bad guy. Yeah. He needs to go to jail.
And they're like, but appealing. And I understand appeals. It's an important part of our...
And it's your right.
Yeah, it's your right. But also, this guy attacked a 6-year-old. And so, I don't know, maybe put some more restrictions on him.
Just let him out there, too.
Right. So the original...
Be somebody else's problem, like I said earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So the original conditions were still supposed to apply. So he went back to the ranch to live with his brother, waiting for the Supreme Court to hear his appeal. So that was June 12th of 1986. So I'm going to switch gears, and we're going to talk about Dena Lynn Gore now. So Dena was born October 12th, 1976, and this summer in 1986, she was 9 years old. She lived in Artesia with her mom, Colleen, who worked in construction, and her brother, Jeff Jr., who was 11, and her mom's boyfriend. Colleen moved the kids to Artesia from El Paso, Texas, after she had gotten divorced from the kids' father, Jeff Sr., in 1982. Jeff Sr. still lived in El Paso. He was remarried to a woman named Kathy, and in the summer of 1986, they had a baby that was a little over a year old. Colleen and the kids lived at 606 West Washington in Artesia, and at the time, Artesia had a population between 10 and 12,000, so it hasn't really changed that much. It hasn't got that much bigger. Yeah. It was a typical suburban neighborhood. Wide streets, kids riding their bikes on the streets, just like we used to do when we were kids. Dena and Jeff Jr. had been in El Paso with their father up until Tuesday, July 15th. they had possibly been living there. I saw one article that said that they had moved to Artesia with their mom when their parents got divorced, and that the kids had moved back to El Paso and had just recently moved back. So I don't know if they had been visiting or if they were living there and then moved back. But they had only been home for 2 days. Dena was just a typical kid. She played with her dolls. She had her little mini bike. She liked to ride motorcycles. She liked to paint with her grandmother. So July 17th, 1986, Dena wanted to go to Allsup's and get a Coke. And her house was about 6 blocks to the Allsup's at First Street and Park. And these aren't city blocks. These are little town blocks. So this is like half a mile. Like maybe not even that much. And basically a straight shot. Like you drive up Washington, you turn right, the Allsup's is right there. So at about 6 p.m. on July 17th, Dena, who is even barefoot, she's just like in her shorts and her tank top, and she takes off to the store. And at 7 p.m., Dena wasn't home yet. And by bicycle, this should have taken 10 minutes round trip, maybe plus the time she took in the store. So she should have been home by 7. And at 8, her family called the police. And remember, this is summertime, so the sun doesn't go down until like 9 o'clock. So it's not like it was dark or anything. And so, I mean, it's also 1986, and everybody's riding their bikes everywhere. And so but 2 hours later, she should have been home. So the police took a picture of Dena to Allsup's. The clerk said that she didn't see Dena in there at that night. And so all that night, the police searched the neighborhood and the immediate area. They found nothing. Officer Ray Faber, F-A-B-R-E, Faber,
I guess,
said that there were 3 possibilities. That 1, she was with friends and didn't realize that her family thought she was missing. 2, she was with a family member, or 3, she was abducted by a stranger. But they felt like the last one was the least likely because her bike was also missing. So I guess I kind of understand, because I guess if she was just snatched, like her bike would just be laying there. But on the other hand, like could have just been thrown into a trunk or whatever. But her bike was still there. So the next day, a former police officer found her bicycle in a weeded lot near Allsup's. And the police chief speculated that someone had found the bike and took it, and then realized it was the one Dena had been riding, and then took it back to the area and hid it. So maybe. A Coke can was also found in the vicinity. Both of the items were sent to Roswell for fingerprints, and then were going to be sent to Albuquerque for further testing. Dena and Jeff had been fingerprinted during a community fingerprinting program. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Got fingerprinted as kids often.
Yes. A lot. I know. I was thinking about that. I was like, that wasn't something we did just once.
They were preparing for us to either be kidnapped or criminals.
Well, it was like there was an epidemic of kidnapping in the 80s, it seems like. But for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, ours was like a table set up in a grocery store, and like police officers were there, and you would go up and they would fingerprint you with like the ink on the little cards. And
nowadays it's all digital.
Now it's all digital. And I don't even know if you take your kids to be fingerprinted. Like I've never taken the bear to do that. So I guess, well, anyway, so the kids had been fingerprinted. Dena and Jeff Jr. had been. And so the FBI had their fingerprints for exclusionary purposes in this case.
There were numerous opportunities, plus our aunt was a cop. And so
that's true.
She also had us fingerprinted.
That's true. For our fake arrests that she always liked to perform on us.
Yes.
So the police continued to do house by house, street by street searches. They were checking with family and friends, school, even though it was summertime. They were like checking with everybody. They couldn't find her. Jeff Sr. and his wife came to town. Colleen's parents came to town. They're still looking. The FBI gets involved. Officers from Roswell, the Eddy County Mounted Patrol, which I didn't even know we had. Or maybe
do we still?
I don't know.
Have?
I was curious about that.
But you didn't Google it.
I didn't Google it. Wow, you would think that I hadn't lived with the internet for the last 20 years.
I need to know something. I guess I'll never know.
I'll never know.
I wish there was some way to find this out.
You know, though, what I was thinking about earlier, and it kind of pertains to that, is that, and I'll talk about this a little later,
All right, guys, thank you for listening to part 1 of the Twisted and Mysterious podcast. Remember, people are gross and don't get murdered.